Dear students, welcome to the Markaz International School's online platform. Myself, I'm Dr. Harris. I'm the principal of this institute. I'm also a faculty for botany. We would like to give you a brief introductions about the chapter, about the wonderful topic, anabiology. And it is one of the crucial chapter what I am going to discuss. This is all about cell. So the chapter name is cell, the unit of life. And it's one of the major chapter play a vital role throughout our NCERT curriculum. And now we're going to discuss about the details in the cell. So we can enter to the cell, the unit of life, and I would like to ask you a wonderful question. And what is actually a cell? And we know cells are the fundamental units of all living organisms. Are the fundamental units of all living organisms. We have studied it from the even we have studied it from the lower classes. So what we are expecting, we have to learn a lot about a cell and what all are actually we discussing about in this chapter. So this chapter literally explain the properties of a cell, types of a cell, and different shapes of a cell. And now we can enter to this chapter. The first question, one of the major question is what is cell? What is cell? Cells play a major role. We know that the cells are the fundamental units of all living organisms, including plants, animal, microbes. Everything is composed of cells. Right? We can call it is actually a cell. A cell is independent, not dependent. Cell is independent. See that the cell is independent. And cell is always possess dynamic functions of life. Cell is always possess dynamic functions of life. And this is what generally we can call it as cell. My question. It was a previous year question in the NEET. Viruses are not considered. What is actually virus? And we are living in a pandemic situations of a coronavirus. So we are very much aware about what is actually a virus. And most of the people believes viruses are living organisms. But we scientists or we biologists believes viruses are not a living organism. It's just a substance. Doesn't have a life. But keep in mind, we already told that cells are organisms and the cells possess unicellular cells possess independent life and they are independent. At the same time, cells possess important functions of living organisms. But viruses, why we are not considering viruses are not a living organism? Because virus is not a living organism and it is always dependent. See that, it's always dependent. Always dependent to a living organism. We know that coronavirus and the COVID, the coronavirus belongs to a class of virus, is dependent to the human body for its propagations, for its reproduction, and for all its metabolic function. It's always required a host cell. Either the human body is a host cell for corona and some plant virus. Some plant virus is also there and it is required plant host cell for their survival. Without the host cell, they are actually nothing. We can call it as it's just a substance. It doesn't have a living characteristics. Virus does not possess any living characteristics without host cell. So a virus is always dependent. So a dependent is not considered as a living organism. So we know that the bacteria is independent. Kingdom Protista is independent. Protozoa, amoeba, paramecium all are independent. They can perform their own life. We know that the kingdom fungi is independent. Mushrooms, yeast, and all possess their life and they all are independent. Humans and plants are independent. They are not depending any other organism to survive in the world. Hence we can enter to the history of this chapter. Now we know that what is actually a cell. We all know what is actually a cell because we are learned it from the lower classes. So we can enter to the deep history about the discovery of a cell, and it is quite interesting. And there are many scientists dedicating their life to prove what is actually a cell. And you can imagine, just imagine, my dear students, we can imagine there is a world people don't have any idea about what is actually a cell and what is the basic unit of life. And later on, there are many group of scientists, even like a philosophers like an Aristotle. You know that Aristotle is one of the famous philosopher in the ancient era. So his pupil Theophrastus, and both of them developed many theories about the cells. And many of the theories are very dramatic, many of the theories are mythical. But they developed this all philosophy without any scientific validations. You know, you can see this image, it's a wonderful image. And now we know what is the structure of a sperm. But this is not actually the structure of a sperm. And Aristotle demonstrated the structure in front of a pupil in that era. And he explained this is what actually a sperm structure. And it includes a miniature form of a baby. See that, the miniature form of a baby. And this miniature form of baby in the structure of a sperm, Aristotle describes this miniature form of a life will enter to the uterus of a woman. And you can imagine once it reaches to the uterus of a woman, it becomes nourished, it becomes nursed, and it becomes a bigger baby. And once it's mature, it got delivered. And this is what a philosophical explanation. And people don't have any idea about a cell. You can imagine, people don't have what is actually a cell. There is no terminology like a cell. So now we can enter to the bit more history, how the terminology is coined like a cell and what is actually a cell. Now we know what is the real sperm structure, right? This is what the real sperm structure. It is almost similar, but it is not a miniature form of a baby. It has a head and middle piece and tail, and it's a vibrant dynamic cell. So the discovery of a cell is much connected with the discovery of a microscope. So you have studied detail about what is actually the microscope here, how the lenses is working, and we have practical here. So you're gonna handle with microscopes, a compound microscope, a dissection microscopes and all. But the discovery of a cell and the discovery of biology is very much connected with the discovery of a microscope. And the early microscope, the first microscope developed by another scientist and is good in making lenses, and his name is Robert Hooke. And he developed a beautiful microscope, and this microscope have a capacity, and he's the first person observed non-living a dead cell through his own microscope. This microscope is a beautiful microscope developed by Robert Hooke, and he observed a small pieces of a cork. What is cork actually? You know that era there is no plastic bottles. Imagine there is no plastic bottle, and people are making wines, and people are carrying glass bottle or leather pouches to bring water. So there is no plastic bottle and there is no plastic caps, and the bottles are screwed up by screwed with cork. Cork is a dead piece of a wood, and you take a small dead piece of a wood. This is what actually the cork. And he take a small piece of a dead piece that from the core, and he sliced out with his knife, and he observed through his own microscope, and he find a beautiful structure like an honeycomb or honey hives. So this is what the structure. It is more similar to the honey hives. So you know the structure, hexagonal structures of a honey hives. We generally called a prison, or we can call it as there is a synonym cell. Okay, so the honeycomb structure is also, we generally used the terminology called cell. And it is the structure what Robert Hooke has observed It is actually similar to the structure of a honeycomb. He coined the terminology, it's a cell, okay? And he coined the terminology in his books. He's drawn the structure in his book, and then later he's coined the terminology, it's a cell. And he's also explained the cell may be the structure, and it is his own observation, this may be the structure used by plants for the transportation or translocations of a material, for the transportations or translocations of a material from root to the various parts of a plant. But we know that in the chapter called the transportations of a material, in the transportations of a material, we're going to study the structure called a xylem, phloem, tracheids, and all others transporting element, transportation components in the plant. There are phloems, xylems, and all. But this is not actually the transportations elements in the plant. This is what the dead cells of a plant, because plants are rigid, plants have rigid cell wall. Once it's dead, the cell wall itself, it's retained. Cell wall never degrade. And because the cell wall is made up of calcium pectate, cellulose, it's a rigid material, more like a cement. The rigid cell wall is always retained in the plant. So you see the structure, he coined the terminology called cell, and he got the credit. Thereby he got the credit, is the first person to observe a dead cell. And he has an hobby, he have a good collections of a fossil, and he take all these microscopic images and he drawn into a book called Micrographia. And later on there is another scientist, and this is what the story about Robert Hooke. And it is much connected to the cell biology. Now we are studying the chapter called cell or cytology, or we can call it as cell biology, all are similar. Cytology. Cytology is nothing but it is much connected to the branch of science which deals with the study of a cell and its property. Okay, let's see. So Robert Hooke's discovery actually open up a world of a microscope. There is another scientist called Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Imagine Anton von Leeuwenhoek also developed a microscope, his own microscope, having 300x observation or magnification capacity, 300x magnification capacity. This is what is his microscope, and its look is actually an odd look. It is not exactly similar to our lab microscope. Our lab microscope is a bit more advanced, as microscope is the first versions of such kind of a microscope. Let's see, it's a beautiful microscope, and he got surprised, and people living in that era doesn't have any idea about microscopic organism. They know what is humans, they know what is animals like lions, elephants, butterflies, and dragonflies, and they know what is maggots, like a small larvas, and they know about the fishes, they know the organism living in the desert, they know what is actually birds, what is actually plants, but they don't have any clue about the organism called microorganism, because microorganisms are living in the world along with the human. They are the first organisms evolved before the origins of the humans or any other animals. We have studied in the previous chapter called biological classification. Let's see. So, Anton von Leeuwenhoek surprised like this. So, amoeba is crawling, and there will be euglena is crawling. What it did actually, it take a small drop of a water, and he observed through his own microscope, and he find euglena. I find many protisters like amoeba, paramecium, and most of the organism is observed is drawn in his own book. And this pictorial representations of his book were submitted to the Royal Society of London. And the Royal Society of London is a scientific community, authentic scientific community where accepted the world of microorganism. So the entire world were surprised due to the presence of, including Anton von Leeuwenhoek is also surprised. And his discovery literally lead people of the world to a surprised mood, and people are realizing there are organisms called microorganism. It is not visible under naked eye, but it is required a microscope as such a kind of a tool. And this is what the evolution or the first initial discovery of a cell, a living cell. Anton von Leeuwenhoek got credit, and he is the first person observed a living cell. And this all discovery literally lead to another thoughts in some scientists. And there is a group of scientists working in Germany. We can call it as people don't have any idea about cell theory again, but But still people living in Anton von Leeuwenhoek's era don't have any idea about what is actually a cell. So there are few scientists are working on cells, like Matthew J. Schleiden, and is a German botanist, is working on plant cell. Is a botanist. You know, botany is the branch of science which deals with the study of a plant. He is a botanist, a German botanist, and he is the person. In 1838, he explained, he identified a few structures of a plant cell through his microscope, and all the labs are equipped with microscope, not with any other sophisticated instrument. In that time, the sophisticated instrument, we can think about it, sophisticated instrument is nothing like, it's a microscope. So he observed, he's a botanist, he's a plant scientist, he's observed all plant cells and he identified some sort of structures and different diverse structures of a plant cell. The same time in 1839, his colleague, that M.J. Schleiden's colleague Theodor Schwann is a zoologist, is also studied with the microscope and observed many cells, the animal cells. He observed animal cells through his own microscope in his lab, and both of them are identified cells of plants and cells of animals. Right? Theodor Schwann observed animal cells, Matthew Schleiden observed plant cells. Right? So still people don't have any idea about how the people were originated and what is actually cells. And these two scientists came up a theory. Both of them came up with a theory that's called cell theory. In 1839, they proposed a cell theory into the scientific world. It's explained all the plants. Theodor Schwann explained all the animals were composed, all the animal cells were composed or constructed with cells. At the same time, Matthew Schleiden explained all the plant cells were composed of cells and its product. What is the product? You know that the product is nothing but it is the cellular organelle that is present in the cytoplasm of the cell. We can call it as product. In the previous time, Robert Hooke was observed a dead cell and the cytoplasm is absent there. Only the cell wall retained the structure. And the product, literally we can call it is the product is nothing but it is cellular organelle, and the entire cytoplasm we can call it as the product, its product. So Matthew Schleiden and Theodor Schwann proposed a theory that's called a cell theory. They came to the world with a definition. There is a theory as a new theory. They proposed all the cells of animals and the plants, or all the bodies of the plants and animals were composed of cells. This is the major theory. This is known as the first cell theory. But obviously people have doubts because people are living with religions like Islam, there will be Christianity, there will be Hinduism, there will be different religions. They all believe in the origins of animals, including humans are from, some religions explain, or some religions demand the humans were originated from mud. Someone is explained this is actually humans and other animals were originated from water. Someone described it's originated from fire. And some Greek mythology believes that humans, even the males, are aliens, or the humans are aliens. The males are from Mars and women are from Venus. And these are the different mythical or religious concepts. People are strongly believe in it. So at the same time, Theodor Schwann and Matthew Schleiden come up with the cell theory, and it proposes all the humans and all the animals and all the plants living in the world were composed of cells. And this is what the first cell theory. Generally people in crowd and generally wide people will ask a question, how the cells were originated. But the Theodor Schwann and Matthew Schleiden are literally unable to answer this question. So they depend on another theory. Generally white people are asking to Theodor Schwann and Matthew Schleiden about the cell theory, how the cells were formed, from where the cells were originated. So Matthew Schleiden and Theodor Schwann literally locked. And they don't have any other explanation to give the proper answer for this question, how the cells were arised. But they depend on another philosophy or another theory that's called spontaneous generation theory. Spontaneous generation theory, we know that the spontaneous generation theory explains all the animals in the world, that including maggots. If once meats are rotten or vegetables are rotten, the maggots were arises. You know that maggots are small larvae. The maggots are arises. Or we can say that the dump in the market, we can find the rats, cockroaches and all. And it is nothing but this theory explains all this organism arises spontaneously from degrading material. This is what we can call it as spontaneous generation. But it is disproved by Louis Pasteur by Schwanneck experiment. It is disproved by Louis Pasteur by Schwanneck experiment. And that means spontaneous generation theory disproved by Louis Pasteur is a scientist, a microbiologist, is disproved the spontaneous generation theory by Schwanneck flask. It's more like a swan neck. You know what a swan, and the flask is look like a swan. And come to the point. So the Theodore Schwann's and Matthew Sleeden explanation towards the question how the cells were formed was not scientific. It's not scientific, it's disproved by Louis Pasteur once. And another scientist in 1855, his name is Rudolf Virchow, he came up with a proposal, he came up with a statement that disproves the second arguments of Theodore Schwann's and Matthew Sleeden, how the cells were arises. That Rudolf Virchow came up with a strong evidence. Rudolf Virchow explained in his book a statement, he quoted a statement, omnis cellulae est cellulae. And it means all the cells were arises from a pre-existing cells. All the cells were arises from a pre-existing cells. And it means all the cells in the plants and animals in all the entire world that arises from a pre-existing cells. There are three important scientists. We can call it as who proposes the cell theory. There will be Theodore Schwann, there will be Matthew Sleeden, and there will be Rudolf Virchow. These three scientists all together proposes the modern cell theory. You know who is the person proposes the old cell theory? There are the two persons in 1838 and 1839. Matthew J. Sleeden and Theodore Schwann proposes the first cell theory. Later on, Rudolf Virchow proposes in addition or incorporations of one more theory, and this is called Rudolf Virchow's additions, and all together we can call it as modern cell theory. What is actually a modern cell theory? Modern cell theory describes all the living organisms, including animals and plants, are composed of cells and its product. It is the first point. All the organisms, including animals, plants, all other organisms, all the unicellular and macrocellular organisms are constructed or composed of cells and its product. And the second part, Rudolf Virchow explained, Rudolf Virchow incorporated this point, all cells were formed from a pre-existing, arises from a pre-existing cell. Okay, a pre-existing cell. This is the core point, and this is what we can call it as a cell theory. So up to this part, there will be a lot of questions were asked for the NEET and AIMS. So who proposes the cell theory? There are three scientists who proposes the cell theory: Matthew Sleeden, Theodore Schwann, and Rudolf Virchow. These three altogether proposes the cell theory that's known as modern cell theory. Okay, keep in mind, this is all what we can call it as a cell theory. Now we know all organisms are composed of cells. We know all organisms are composed of the cells and its product. Or we know that every cells in our body that divide from a parental cell or pre-existing cell. All cells in our body, including our sperm cells, our egg cells, everything is formed from a pre-existing cell. Right? And this is what we can call it as a cell theory. And now we know the cell is the unit of life. Cell is the unit of life. Now we've got an idea. Now we've got a light to the chapter name that's called Cell, the Unit of Life.